Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Learning to keep the door or the windows of the heart open is not an easy task. That is why we need all the support we can get. And for that, the Dhamma is supreme in what it can offer the person. In this case, the practitioner. One of the recent arahants of the 20th century, Ajahn Mun of the Thai forest tradition, would say something along the lines of, if the Dhamma is unshakable, unswerving within, then the samudaya, or the origin of things, the causes of suffering, do not arise ever again. But we've become so reactionary in this world. To the point where we've convinced ourselves that that is the only way to survive on this planet, to survive, to just live, to be reactionary. So we see something and we react to it. We see something we like, we respond to it by wanting to grab onto it. We see something we do not like, and then we want to push it away from us as far as possible. In essence, that is the dynamic, the situation, the reality that the Buddha called upadana, which is clinging or grasping. Sometimes we like to have these terms and we memorize them, and we might even write them down somewhere just to get an idea of what it is. What is this science? What is this methodology that I need to adhere to in order for me to understand more and more this thing called my life? So we theorize, we conceptualize a lot. So they become abstractions, in essence, not connected with life itself, the way that we have come to experience it. So that is not what the teachers and Lord Buddha talks about the Dhamma as. Because it's so easy for us to fall into the trap of replacing the old narratives or paradigms with what the Dhamma is presenting. Still, it's much better than the previous paradigms. However, if it's taking the role of something superficial, coming to replace the other one, it's another layer, then when the reality of life comes knocking on the door, the wind is going to blow it away. The wind of the intensity of emotions, that is, the propensities, the drives we have been developing, coming back to the reactionary way of living. And that's one of the reasons why many people have a tough time. When things are going so well on a retreat or during meditation, and then they go home, or the next phase of their lives start to take place, and they're afraid as to whether they might slip back into the old patterns. But why? It's a valid fear. It comes from experience. Because it has not been absorbed. The quickest way that we can learn to allow the Dhamma to seep into one's own life, into one's own psyche, into one's own behavior, character, where personality changes do take place, is to start with how well we are living our lives according to sila, morality, virtue, which takes effort. Sometimes students ask, Bhante, but I don't have anything to back up this metta with or on. I don't have anything good. In essence, when you dig around, that's what they're trying to say, what they're feeling. How am I going to give metta to someone when I have nothing but a desert here, an arid wasteland of disappointments? And I just pause them for a millisecond and ask, have you kept any of your precepts at any time, as best as you can remember? And they say, of course. And I ask, has any of those precepts that you've kept produced a positive result to you or to someone else? Did they bring in a better state of affairs? And they say, of course. I don't smoke as much, I don't drink as much, I don't drink at all, I don't hit this person, I don't yell, I don't curse, and I sleep better at night. Is that a good thing? Yes, it is a good thing. Can we start from that? That is what I encourage meditators to start with. Every time they feel that they're in a battle that presumably they cannot win, this is the self-talk, and to look back and to be truthful to the work that they've already done. That is what is meant by come to that sense of genuine goodness within you. The goodness that's not, straight out of the factory. It's done and packaged. No, it's something we work on a daily basis. Hence sila, because it has tremendous rewards to give. And it's a good thing to go back and check to see how the sila, the practice of precepts, creating this virtuous behavior when there was not, the sense of peace that comes from not having remorse anymore about something that we used to do constantly and felt disappointed afterwards. And seeing that, feeling that peace, tasting that peace, that's when Dhamma becomes real. And the more of those occurrences, the more of those check-ins that we can do with ourselves on a daily basis, the more the Dhamma becomes more and more unshakable, because now you are basing it on your reality, the reality of your experience, of your practice. This is when the Dhamma is seeping into you, into your own practice, into your own character. This is where truly personality change takes place. So the Dhamma now is not another layer that's been added, another set of data or information gathering, merely notes taken as if in college class or university. No, no. It's applied. The Dhamma is applied. So the reactions are not our destiny. I mentioned the role of upadana, or clinging, or grasping. But there is an alternative to living with grasping. And that is picking up only to give up. Adana patinisagga, the Buddha mentions. Picking up only to give up. Tasting, experiencing that contact, getting the feeling of that, but not carrying whatever the feeling produced, not carrying those side effects, impressions with us as we go on. Of course, the Buddha gave us wonderful schemas and structures and formulas to demonstrate this, the connection of these various aspects of this living consciousness that we go through. One in particular, obviously, is the Paticca-samuppada, or the 12 links of causal relations. But these, again, are just abstractions, so long as they are not seen in one's life through activities, through how these interplays are taking place, how the connections of the various different input coming in and going out. Am I grasping? Or is there a picking up only to give up? This is not easy. This is not something that you can just memorize. This is not something that you can, again, layer upon, because I've seen people become parrots in their recitation of the formula, for example, the 12 links. They're not separate from our reality, our own reality. And the easiest way to remind ourselves that this is taking place, that there is grasping happening, is always to sniff out the presence of suffering. It's always there. However, usually the mind that is burdened by the fears and worries, although it is burning with suffering, it is unable to see it. Because only a happy mind can actually see the presence of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation or ending of suffering, and therefore the way, the path that leads one to the cessation or ending of suffering. So the mind has to be relaxed, available, open. And I use the mind and the heart, alternatingly. So they're pretty much the same in this context. So the reality is taking shape in front of us, but we have everything to do with it. It's not happening to us. That is why an awakened mind chooses to step out of a reactionary state. And one of the ways to do that is to pull yourself out from holding on to things, from grasping onto things, whether it's fear, whether it's this, whether it's that, and just looking at the picking up and giving up part. Adana patinisagga. And to see what is taking place. Because it's always continuous. There's new sense awarenesses coming in. It's plural, sense awarenesses. Another word for that is consciousness or vijnana. Again and again and again and again and again and again. It's like the various frames on a strip of film. Shot by shot by shot by shot. If it's a 24 FPS, frames per second, then it's 24 different shots, different sense awarenesses, if you will, happening within a single second. Of course, they're happening a lot faster, but I'm just using the language or the metaphors of film, motion picture, or animation. But we're sticking on to one frame and playing it out throughout the 2 hours, or the rest of our lives in this case. So we're stuck. We're not allowing ourselves to move with life. The freshness is lost, is in fact never tasted. And that's another thing that takes place when a person starts meditating and they start tapping into these deeper layers of the mind or the heart. There's a certain sense of freshness, soothing, relaxed attitude, if you will. So we must look intently. We must look intently to the processes that are taking place. Self-understanding and knowledge does not arise because, as Ajahn Mun would say, because the song of the thoughts, or sankharas, if you will, those mental concoctions that we keep doing and engaging ourselves with constantly, again, which comes from grasping, holding on to an image, a thing, an experience we've had in the past. And that plays out for the rest of our lives, or the rest of our day, or the rest of the hour. So we need not look for this sense of discovery or awakening, if you will, to come out of sankharas, because that is not their domain, because they're just bits and pieces of undigested food, if you will, mental associations or sanya or perceptions that have been instigated because of a contact that took place. Something we picked up, something happening. The Pali word for it is phassa. There's a touch. There's a contact with the 6 senses. And suddenly, the mind grabs a picture and says, this is like that thing that occurred. And it just drops it. Sanya happens rather abruptly, and it's short-lived. Now, what sankharas do, on the other hand, is a different story, because they will start to edit, pick at it, weave things into it and out of it and from it. Constructions, that's another word for sankhara. They start fabricating things. And all of a sudden you start noticing, you come into wakefulness, if you will, and see that you've wasted 27 minutes of your sit. Where did it go? I was lost in thoughts. It's so embarrassing. But how did I come to notice that I was lost in my thoughts? Because sati was introduced. In this case, sati also would have sampajanya or panya or wisdom, discernment, to identify what took place. Yes, that was the sankharas. I see. Even that, we need to approach it with adana patinisanga, without the element of upadana or the grasping. Just picking up, yes, I see it, and letting go. And coming back to your mental object of meditation, to allowing the mind to experience its fullness. So we use the Dhamma for a purpose. We don't add it on to our inventory of things that we can use to get into arguments, debates, making a point, etc., etc. Who cares? It's pointless. Ultimately, you're going to drop that anyhow. It's what we do with it in understanding our suffering. And to understand suffering, the mind has to be in a state where it is at the very least calm. It's like having a piece of paper that's all covered up in scribbles and lines and all kinds of distorted things, writings, drawings, this and that. So it's a mess. It's a mess. So if somebody puts a dot in that mess, you're not even going to identify that dot. You're not even going to see the dot. So as we're practicing meditation, we're removing these lines, these squiggly lines, these scribbles, these blotches of ink. All these things are coming out. And slowly, we can see that it is actually white paper or a background or a canvas. And we remove some more and we start seeing these different dots. And all of a sudden, eventually, the more we work, the more the mind gets to see, if it reaches that point, as it works on it, feeling the need for the person to really get the mind to that crisp, clear, bright mind, which is another form of way of saying happy mind, uplifted mind, calm and relaxed, equanimous, collectedness of mind, or the Buddha used the word samadhi for it. So in that state, you will be very clearly able to see the tiniest little dot the moment it shows up, and you would see it as suffering. And when we see the suffering, the immediate next step would be, why? Why? Where is this coming from? There was a cause for it. This thing happened to me. Somebody didn't say goodbye on the phone with me and just abruptly hung up on me, and we were having a nice conversation. Now I see why I've been feeling like this. There's this sense of dis-ease within my heart, within me, within even maybe my throat or my head, my temples. But the person might have suffered for days until getting to that point of realization as to why. But they've been carrying this 10-pound lead around their neck as if day by day, hour by hour, without realizing why. So this is why we practice sati, mindfulness, in a continuous basis, to see if there's any fluctuations like this. Wait a minute, what is this thing that's being added to my neck? Like, what is this? What is this dot on this crisp piece of paper? Where did this come from? So this metaphor, analogy, I see it directly connected with the way that we feel in our bodies, in our hearts, in our mind, because there's a certain level of sense of cringing or tightness or heaviness that's bogging us down. So let us produce the sense of lightness. Through the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, which takes place in every single interaction, so long as there's dukkha. But we have to have the eyes to see it and the willingness to look. But to look with fresh eyes. Venerable Bahia, he became awakened the quickest in all the Buddha's disciples, the quickest, with just a few words. The Buddha said, when seeing Bahia, just see. Just see. Don't carry any other stories and narratives. Don't hold on. Ah, yes, the light, the color, the red, this, that. No, just see. When you see something repulsive, you're just seeing something as repulsive. You're seeing it and you're walking away. You're not holding on to the repulsiveness of it. The mind is not engaged in mental associations which take flight in the form of sankharas to follow, mental edits, concoctions, weavings. But it just sees. And sees one instant after the other. You don't have to have time to react. You're doing adana patinisagga, picking up only to give up, and living life fully because your arms are open. Your cup is always empty. And that is living in unison with freshness. So I will stop here and open for any questions you might have. Yes, KK.
As I emailed you yesterday, I could not attend the first half of the session because I was in a parent support group. It was a wonderful coincidence that the felicitator said that Buddhism saved her life and her child's life. So I said, yeah. So it was really wonderful that, that she said that what she learned, as a therapist, she felt that she go on this retreat in Nepal, and her daughter that was really dying from anorexia, it saved both of their lives. So I just want to share that.
Thank you. It definitely does save lives. Many, many, many lives. And I'm talking about one single person. When a person becomes a sotapanna, forget about it. It's done. They're not going to lower realms anymore. At the very, very most, they're just going to be hovering from life to life in samsara for within either the deva realms or the human realms, nothing lower, for another. And this is only in the case of them being extremely, extremely lazy, very stubborn, an arrogant type. No more than 7 lives. That's a good deal. So they have spared themselves many, many lives. And this happens again and again. This is mentioned again and again in details, in different ways that the Buddha takes so much time to explain in so many suttas. So, yeah, and it starts with right view. Right view. And that is what we were talking about a few weeks ago. How does the person know? Well, the presence of right view, is it there or not? Which brings a sense of confidence that it's not coming from a degree, a PhD, or acknowledgement from others, some type of an affirmation that they're saying to themselves. No, they've passed the point of no return. They can never, ever go back to their old ways of thinking yesterday, the one that they held on to yesterday. Something switched. And that's what the Buddha called right view. Or another way of saying it is jnana dassana, knowing and seeing for oneself. So that is what the Dhamma delivers. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? I guess when you meditate for 2 hours, the need for so many questions kind of... Yes, Russell.
No, it's not a question, Bhante, but thank you. Recently I've been feeling that, and I told a few people that I kind of felt that I have lived many, many lives already. At first I was getting a little bit depressed about, entering the 7th decade, but then I don't know, something sort of happened. And then I realized that, well, actually, you have been many people and led many lives already. And so whatever might lie ahead for you or other people that is, it's another life. Not even just a part, not just even a continuation, but sort of a different, a different lifetime almost. So it's a little strange because I'm not really into believing all this stuff about say reincarnation or whatever, but somehow I've just felt that maybe it's just given the last year and all the tumultuous events, but I've just felt that already they say cat with 9 lives or something like that. But I really actually do feel like that, because when I look back at, a life decade by decade, then I say, well, who's that? I mean, I can't even recognize. I mean, I cannot recognize I can recognize the person, sort of, but I cannot recognize the thought or whatever that's in their eyes. So, I mean, that's a kind of a strange thing. I mean, maybe I'm just sort of daydreaming or thinking things up. But anyway, I just wanted to say that, but I look at it as a positive thing.
If, let's just say, for the sake of, I wouldn't say argument, but just for the sake of it, if you were to go into another life, start another life, would you start it differently than now, than how you've lived this life?
It means to start from the beginning?
Well, of course, you got to start from the beginning. But would you be approaching life differently? Because you've said, I've gone through all these changes in my life, and I've entered the 7th decade, and I don't recognize this person or the way of thinking. Okay, for us to look at that, okay, way of thinking is now changed. It's transformed. It's different. So
I
if
see.
I go into another life, so how would it be different if I carry over this new way of thinking that these 70 years have brought me to?
No, I think the difference is that before I would look upon the past with regret or nostalgia, or the desire to relive, especially the high points, I guess, and avoid the low points. But now I'm, it's not that I don't care, but it's sort of c'est la vie, it doesn't matter as much. So I don't have that. Whereas, as I said before, I have a really burning desire to, really burning regret or nostalgia, or trying to rebuild, recall, or, past lives, I guess, So I guess that would be the difference. I mean, I wouldn't really know what would lie ahead if I had, when I face a new life, but I'm not, I'm not facing it with remorse or nostalgia. So I guess that would be the difference, in this particular decade.
It's important to look at whether there is any of this or these conclusions coming from the physical aspect of things, meaning the body is not what it used to be, obviously, in the 7th decade compared to the 20th, the 2nd decade in your 20s. So it's a good thing to always go back and view. And for this reason, journaling is really, really powerful, because it helps you to kind of gauge, okay, where are these feelings and these sense of, or realizations, if you will, coming from? Because there are several different phenomena that take place as we age. It happened to the brain. Psychologists, especially sociologists, have noticed this. For example, when a person hits around 50, they stop caring about what other people think, about their opinions, about their look, about how they live their lives. You just stop caring about other people, so they don't become the primary focus. So slowly, and also there's different hormonal changes that are happening throughout the body, male and female. Doesn't make a difference, but there are changes definitely individually taking place. So a good thought to have in the background would be, okay, or a question, okay, is my wanting to be kind of like laissez-faire attitude, having that attitude, or just like, yeah, I don't care. It's like, I'm not going to be so fixated on my look, or this or that? Is it coming from these different normal human development stages that come in different decades, for example? Or is it truly coming from a deep understanding, irrespective of the age, irrespective of what's taking place in the body? Because if the body, you try to, let's say, lift a certain amount of weight, or compete in a certain competition or race, and because of one's age, let's say, they're no longer, or limitations, they're no longer able to achieve that goal. Part of the brain might come to accept that reality and never say they could say the word defeated or refuse that. But the fact is that they give up on it because of the limitations. That's not the understanding that Dhamma gives. So when a person reaches the end of their life, and it doesn't matter, advanced in age, they might be 30 years old in the hospital and about to exit on the deathbed. My key, focus is only on the person's attitude. What are their thoughts revolving around? What emotions are predominant? Is it regret? Is it craving? This is where the grasping part comes in as well. Because if you're 70 or 90 or 100 years old and the person says, I don't care anymore, I really am, I'm beyond it. Okay, let's come to you and give you this magic pill, and all of a sudden you're back in your 20s. Physically, the vigor, everything is there. Strength, virility, everything. The way your brain works. Now, where is that attitude? Is it gone? Or is it still there, but now in the healthy body of a 20-year-old? That is the distinction that I would offer here in relation to the Dhamma.
Well, that's hard. That's kind of hard. I mean, I doubt if it's from deep understanding. It's probably more, seeing material, biological, physical, physiological deterioration. I would imagine. Hopefully, there's some understanding, but it's not deep.
If you're here week in, week out, every Saturday I see you, that says a lot. And I think you probably have not missed a single retreat from way back last year. That I mean, but I'm just talking about the Zoom and this COVID thing, and during that time, the lockdown, and us doing the retreats here online digitally. That says a lot about the effort that you're putting in. And that does change you. Now, how fast, how much, that is, beyond the scope of this.
No, I think it's less my effort or earnestness. It's more that I'm grateful. I mean, I don't think you missed a retreat either, since except maybe at the temple last week or so, whatever the time thing. But I mean, you've been to so many places and in so many time zones. I think that's pretty dedicated. So I'm grateful, and actually I feel a little guilty. I mean, you're offering this. This time, this space for people, and it's not a forced, mandatory thing. It's a choice, and so you're actually giving people a choice, for this important task. It's not like a choice to wash your car or not wash your car. It's a whole different thing. So I feel that it's almost like a covenant or a compact in a way. So that's how I kind of look at it. So it's really less my dedication. It's more, it's more appreciation, I guess. Anyway, thanks.
Yes, KK.
Russell and I argue all the time about these sessions. For me, it's definitely not just appreciation, but actually feeling that it has helped me all this time in being a much happier. Actually, I wasn't lying when I say this is the best time of my life. And I'm different from Russell, as opposed to feeling that I too have very grateful to have lived a long life and different lives. But much more so now than before, because I feel that I knew so little about the Dharma, and I really want to live longer so that I can get to, whether I get to Nirvana is not important, but just to get to where you said that, you know, you can be an example to other people as opposed to lecturing. You know, I've lectured all my life, and it would be so nice to not to lecture, but just be and to live for others in that sense, you know, and yet live a really happy life, because you don't feel, oh, I have to make sure I'm good looking, I have to dye my hair. Russell is the one who wants me to dye my hair. So I'm very happy being, you know, it doesn't matter. These things totally do not matter to me anymore. So I feel in that way, I just absorbed the Dharma in a sense that all these earlier attachments in life, instead of mourning, regretting that, oh, I've lost my beauty, I've lost this and that, I just feel it's so nice not to be preoccupied, not to be attached to those things. So in that sense, I just feel, yes, if I have one more year, it's one more year of the best life of my life, best time of my life. And I totally recognize that time is very challenging. There are ups and downs, but if you're willing to go with the flow and watch your mind, I just feel that I can live my future days very confidently and happily. Mm-hmm. So I think in that sense, I'm a happier person about greeting my next life than Russell, not just to say, hey, try something new, but. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did somebody have a hand up? It's good to be exposed to the suttas, to read the suttas. So the brain likes to use the data, obviously, that it has access to. Memories, associations, all these things, they have their benefits. Of course, sanya and sankhara, they have their benefits. After all, we're formulating words that come from thoughts. We're expressing them contextually, et cetera, et cetera. So they have their own benefits for conventional purposes, of course. And similarly, when we read the suttas, when we get to look at the suttas and see the scenarios and life situations of various people that came before us, lay people and monastics, men and women, we start seeing aspects of ourselves, and especially our aspects of our lives in them. And then we see, so I know that some of you have mentioned, oh, Nibbana or Nirvana is not my goal, is not my goal. Well, why shouldn't it be your goal? Why shouldn't it be your goal? Because what's so fun about the world around us, a person might say. You know, I come decade after decade after decade after decade, and boom, my head falls forward and I'm gone. I'm dead. And we start the show again, and and it goes on, life to life to life to life. Now, of course, this is something that a person individually must come to that understanding and appreciation. But the suttas can help us see that there's been many, many people like us with the same views that we have. They had those views as well, 2,600 years ago. But what got them to change? What got them to really look at, for example, Nibbana in a more careful manner? what got them really to see that there needs to be this urgency element added. And it doesn't come with age at all. Age is just a number here, because there's one particular, I was mentioning this to another student, incident where there was a 7-year-old young boy, and his mother was a big supporter, and her family was a big supporter of Venerable Sariputta. So, so she wanted to get pregnant, and when she had that desire, and was a fervent desire, she made the determination that when she does have a child, and she's pregnant, and when she does have a boy, she would be dedicating him to the Sangha, so that he, in this case, would be a student of Venerable Sariputta, whom the family supported, and they were well off, etc. And lo and behold, she does get pregnant, and she does have a child, boy. And at the age of 7, she begs Venerable Sariputta to come and give him the precepts and give him the novice ordination. Basically, what that means is they become a novice monk, and they are taken into the Sangha. So long story short, he becomes Venerable Sariputta's student, 7-year-old little child running around, following. So one day he's walking, and as a novice monk and a student of Venerable Sariputta, he was carrying Venerable Sariputta's bowl when they went to alms rounds for food offerings. So, but he was such a bright young boy that he starts looking at the world that he's seeing. He sees how people, farmers were irrigating the land to create these canals where waterways could go through and supply water to the various fields for harvest. And he asked the question, Bhante, what is this? What are they doing? And Venerable Sariputta says, they are irrigating the land to supply water, etc. So he says, the river does not have a mind? He says, no, it doesn't. So he says, So people need to guide the water, direct it, control it. So if the water can be directed, how come I cannot control my mind? So if they can control this thing that doesn't have a mind, I should be able to control this thing. And it's my mind. So my tendencies, my habits, this and that. So they move a little bit further, and they see workers working on straightening arrows. So they would get bamboos or pieces of wood, and they would, on fire, they would straighten it if it's crooked, getting the edges off and then all that. And he says, Bhante, what are they doing? He says, they are arrow makers. They're cleaning up the shaft, straightening it so that they could sell the arrows. So the same thing happens. He's connecting it to his mind. So if they can straighten that piece of wood, I can straighten my mind, bring it under control. And then the last episode of that day, in this case, would be him passing by a carpenter shop. So they see a bunch of carpenters cleaning up, straightening these pieces of wood so that they can be parts of furniture, for example. And then he sees this, and then he goes, Bhante, I think it's time for me to go ahead and sit. 7 years old child. And he says, he gives the bowl, which was getting filled up with food, and he offers it with so much respect to Venerable Sariputta. Now, this would be disrespectful in a sense. Okay, why don't you take your bowl? I'm going to go and sit, type of a thing. But obviously, we're dealing with an arahant. And in the case of Venerable Sariputta, he takes the bowl and he says, he realizes that this child is at a very, he's on the cusp. He can really get there very soon. And as an arahant, he would be able to identify these things, in his case at least. And he says, no, I don't want you to go and sit outside under a tree, because he figures out that there's going to be noise and people passing by. He needs absolute calm. And he says, no, I want you to go back to the monastery. And I want you to go into my kuti, use my kuti, he says. Close the door behind you and sit. And don't worry about the food. And the young child says, Bhante, by the way, they're going to give you 100 flavored meal today. 100 flavored meals. So there's going to be so many different types of food in his bowl. And he says, could you please bring me some? He's a 7-year-old child. And Venerable Sariputta says, yes, you go meditate. It's a lovely scene. And the child goes to the monastery, goes straight, as he was instructed, straight to Venerable Sariputta's door, kuti, small hut, closes the door behind him and sits to meditate. Meanwhile, Venerable Sariputta goes to his alms round, and then he goes and sits down and has his meal. And then he sits with other supporters and gives a Dhamma talk. And then meanwhile, it's evening almost. But there's a miraculous thing that happens. They say Sakka, the king of the gods, had advised the sun and the moon, the celestial objects, not to move. Because a monk is not supposed to eat after a certain time, midday, basically, around 11:30 to about 12-ish, you already have to be seated and eating your food. By 1, the latest, you should be done, which is like they used to have a stick about a foot long into the ground, and the way that they could tell the time difference or the passing of time at noon is if the stick no longer was just a tiny little dot of shadow, it had moved by about a finger or two width. So it had gotten bigger, the shadow type of a thing. So the sun hadn't moved. So, I mean, you can take this any way you want. But, so in the evening, the Venerable Sariputta goes to the monastery. Now, the Devas had made sure that it was absolutely quiet in the monastery, not a peep, not even birds were chirping. They made sure of that because they said, this child is really going to make it today. Because at that moment, he had just reached the point of being a non-returner, 7-year-old non-returner, anagami. But Venerable Sariputta was approaching with the bowl of food to his kuti. Lord Buddha realizes the situation. He was watching it all along. And he comes, shows up right in front of Venerable Sariputta's face, and he just basically blocks away his way from reaching the door. So he was about to open the door. Lord Buddha stands in front of him and says, Sariputta, what do you have there? And he says, Bhante, I have food. I bring food. And Lord Buddha asks, what does food have within it? Sariputta says, Bhante, it has things that come out of the 4 great elements. He says. And what do the 4 great elements bring? And Sariputta says, well, they bring the 6 sense bases, their objects, and the consciousnesses associated with those, meaning the sense awarenesses of all these 6, meaning sight, auditory, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, and the mind that cognizes. At that moment, the young boy, whose name is Sukha Kumara. Sukha means, it's the opposite of dukkha. Sukha is the pleasant feeling of happiness. Kumara means young boy. So Sukha Kumara, who was sitting in the kuti, he was hearing these words of Lord Buddha and the interaction between him and Sariputta. At that moment, he becomes an arahant because he realizes the connection of contact, which I was referring to earlier, with food, his senses. And he was hungry. His stomach must have been growling at that point. He hadn't eaten all day. So in his mind, he was like putting so much emphasis on the food. But because of the way that it was delineated now for him by these two teachers, Lord Buddha and his marshal of the Dhamma, Venerable Sariputta, he gets it. He understands that there was a presence of craving. He understands the ignorance. He understands the role of the asavas at that point, and how he wanted to re-become, meaning no longer become hungry and become satiated, for example. And the ignorance just drops, and he becomes one of the arahants at 7 years old. And the Buddha steps aside and says, "Go ahead now, Sariputta, open the door and feed the child." And he does. Meanwhile, the other monks come in and they're surprised and they're saying, "Bhante, why is the sun still up?" And after the boy eats, suddenly it becomes evening. It just gets darker. So these stories help us in this tumultuous time period, especially occupying a body that day by day by day is getting older, is getting closer to that point of death. And how are we leaving? How are we about to leave this world? Will there be more fears, different fears, but essentially fears, worries? Will there be clingings? Will there be graspings? Will there be cravings? Will there be ignorance? Or will there be an insightful approach to situations? Or can we even preempt that entry point into another life and attain Nibbana? If not in this world, then at the point of between the two worlds, if you will, the ending of this life and the beginning of the next. So the Buddha's encouragement was always, always to at the very least attain the Sotapanna stage, which is a wonderful gift that he gave us, that encouragement, which I pass on to you. So I hope this has been helpful, and I encourage you to continue. Yes, Greg.
Could you just remind us, I must have missed it, the name of that sutta you just related?
Oh, it is actually from the commentary to the Dhammapada. And the verse, I forgot the number, but it is the verse related with... I've recorded it. I mean, it's there. But even briefly, the story behind it, but just the commentary goes deeper, so, which I failed to remember the name of the commentary, which section it was. But the Vagga, or the verse of the Dhammapada, is on the irrigators. Irrigators guide the canals of water. Arrow straighteners straighten the shaft of wood, and carpenters work on the pieces of wood, making them flat, etc. I don't remember the name of the verse number, but it's there. It's from the Dhammapada, in answer to your question, but I don't know if it ever comes up in the suttas. It might very well be, but also it is mentioned in the portions of it in the, I believe, in the Great Disciples of the Buddha, edited by Bhikkhu Bodhi. and also written, portions of it was written by Helmut Hecker and late Bhante Nyanaponika Katera, I think. So it's from the Dhammapada, and it's from the commentary, the backstory part. Because the Dhammapada verses were not like the other suttas where the Buddha was asked to give a discourse, in a sense. People came with questions. The Dhammapada were more like verses that were, the Buddha was inspired to say, almost. So he knew what had transpired during the day. And he was saying those words about the irrigators straighten the waterways, which the child had asked Venerable Sariputta. So he saw where it started from that day and what it led to. So it's a beautiful verse. If you like, I can find out and then have Dhamma.
Thank you. I can track it down with that information.
All right, wonderful. So next week will be the sutta exploration and finding my way out, thanks to with the help of the suttas. I think one of the students inspired me to use more of a catchy title to that series, Chitta. So yes, and the title of the next sutta, I believe, Dhammadina, you sent the group?
Yes, Bhante, it's the dosing of Venerable Mahamoggallana's
yes.
question.
Pachalayamana Sutta. It's a great sutta. It's a powerful sutta. So I recommend you read it or listen to it prior, and write any questions down before, if you want to, if something comes up. Anyhow, let us do the dedication of merit. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Be well, stay safe, keep smiling, keep the mind light and your attitude inclined more towards picking up only to give up. Adana patini sagga. Be well.
Thank you, Bhante.